great to meet everyone. Put together some thoughts. So we actually did a similar class last year for the second program. So Swayable uses causal data to measure persuasion. And this is actually a really accelerating trend in the industry and one I think is important to know about and think a little bit about. So we think of ourselves as a data platform or a product company. We're not selling professional services or our time or work in any way. And the campaigns that use us are basically figuring out if they're persuading people. In other words, if they have a story to tell about why their product is good, is it working? In terms of sort of more context, these are the selection of some of the companies and organizations that we're working with, including some of the sort of more technically sophisticated technology players. You can see at the top, they're telling stories about their brand and their products. As I mentioned, we do a lot in public interest advocacy, state governments. We work a lot with agencies and consultancies. And then at the bottom, we have data partnerships and research partnerships with a number of top research institutions. And in terms of backers, we actually haven't raised a lot of money, but we work with a combination of both impact investors. These folks are focused on technology that helps the world in some way that is consistent with their mission. They're 501c3 nonprofits. And of course, these folks who are primarily interested in just like big companies that can become the next unicorns. As Raoul mentioned, I got started thinking about this problem at my previous tenure at the New York Times. And this is some of the reporting that we were doing at the time. They're innovating on how to use digital platforms to tell more effective stories. And the thing that really stood out to me was that when you tell a story like this, the goal of the storytellers is to change the way you think, is to let you understand something, let you appreciate the importance of this issue. This is incredibly compelling footage, cartography, drone videography of melting permafrost in Alaska, I think, or maybe Greenland somewhere. So the point is not just to get a click or sell some more ads against it. There's a higher goal here. And the problem is you have no idea if you're doing it. So are we succeeding? Are we not succeeding? I don't know. It's sort of a gut kind of question. It's not one that's answered by data. We're in this world where people telling stories are getting dashboards, left, right, and center with data about supposedly the performance of what they're doing. And yet this central question for which the entire team has been built, for which the whole organization is dedicated its mission to, there's no number on any of these dashboards that answers that question. How many people woke up the next day and cared about climate change and cared about this issue that this institution in part is dedicated to informing them about, right? That's not on that squiggly line or, on this emoji count from Facebook. And so, here is what the advertising for the New York Times looked like when I joined. Pretty uninspired, no shade on the people that did this. I know them, they're great people, but their jobs were kind of a bit boring. They had to sit around and figure out whether this orange rectangle gets you half a percentage point more click-through on Facebook than this red rectangle. It's red if you look on the screen. And it's 50% off the right discount for however many weeks, or 40%, teams of people to figure out how to A/B test towards this micro optimization of the conversion, the final click, the bottom of the funnel event that happens. And you can keep doing that, get a 0.5% left, right, and center. But actually, when the game really changed for the New York Times was when they brought in the first ever CMO, a guy called David Rubin, who had a background in just regular commercial marketing. He's like, well, what are you guys doing? You have an iconic brand. Why are we doing click-through rate optimization at the bottom of this funnel when there's a story to tell about this organization's role in society and the product's role in society? They threw it together really quickly within just, I think, a few weeks of David's tenure. And, blanketed, the cities with it. And since that point, the New York Times growth has been dramatically higher than it was when we were just squeezing the extra blood out of the stone with click-through rate optimization. So I think the subscriber base is now roughly 3 times larger than it was at the point that this billboard was put up, sort of before to afterwards. So the big question that we see then as having been unanswered in the space of storytelling, marketing, and campaigning more broadly is how do you measure and can you measure performance for important stories, big picture narratives like this, the way that you can measure performance for who clicks where and which color, gives you a little bit extra. Stories like that, or stories like this, all these iconic campaigns that people actually think about when they get inspired about the work that creators can do in these areas. This is a campaign by one of our clients, the government of Iceland's tourism bureau. There's not even any copy on it. It just sort of has the tagline and shows the picture, right? That it does something to you. It makes you want to go to this remote location and jump into this sort of freezing cold lake, or I don't know, like spring, whichever they're selling here. Airbnb is another one. So the big problem we try to solve is how could we put a number on that? How could we say, let's develop performance metrics for important stories, as well as the micro ones. And basically, the way to think about that, which is what you guys are doing, is really to look at the two main stages of the purchase funnel and to sort of say, well, look, a lot of the optimization that the industry has really spent the last 1 to 2 decades on has been down here because of the advent of digital platforms like Meta's and like Alphabet's, Google and Facebook. They've built brilliant engines for optimizing this stuff, but not so much for this stuff here. And in fact, they've kind of come to define a set of terms that have almost sort of moved the game onto their terms. So this is often just called performance marketing. When people say performance marketing, it's not supposed to just refer to the bottom of the funnel, but it's kind of implicitly had heavy connotations now that if someone says they're a performance marketer, this is always the stuff that they're thinking about, which sort of raises the question, so I guess, performance is just not something we worry about when we spend, actually what is the majority of the spend in marketing campaigns. This one of the funnel is typically not a majority, it's typically less than half. It's hard to get stats. So the traditional answer has just been, well, for the top of the funnel, you just listen to dudes like this. They have inspiring campaigns, they know what's right, you got to do it. Don't worry about the data, just kind of go with your gut. And genuinely, that's been the equilibrium that the industry's been in for really since this guy really was walking around Madison Avenue. However, there is a better way to do this. It's just that it hasn't really been typically deployed. So if you really did say, I don't want to trust that guy, I really do want to know what the performance of a big story is in a marketing campaign, you actually have been able to get an answer to it. It just took a really long time. You had to do something called a brand list study or randomized controlled trial. You have a control group that you don't show anything to, and you ask them, hey, what do you think of the New York Times? What do you think of Thomas's English Muffins? Do you want to buy them? Do you think that's a great brand? Whatever the brand equities is, do you think they're healthy? And they'll give you some answers, and let's say the answer is 5 out of 10 on average. Okay, great. And then you take a second group, and you show them the advertising. And you ask them at the end the exact same questions. And if the advertising works, of course, we can all predict what you would expect, right? These numbers are going to be higher than those numbers, because that's the point of advertising, right? And you've got to ask the right questions to match what you're trying to achieve. Do you want to buy the brand? Do you like the brand? That's where the strategy of the marketing campaign comes in. Maybe I think I want to lift your perception that it's tasty, and I know that will be a leading driver of you wanting to buy it. So I start with tasty. Or, it might be Airbnb, and I know that people have real trust and safety considerations or concerns around having strangers in their house. Okay, let's address them. Let's talk about what we're doing. Is that metric going up? Is that leading to demand afterwards? So you can do an RCT and learn the answer to this. You get some number at the end which compares these two groups. As long as you set it up properly, you've got to randomize who goes in which group, so you know that there's no systematic differences that you're starting with. That used to take a couple of months. So basically, really, what we've done here is just accelerate the way that you can do that, so that instead of taking, 2 months and a manual process, that's a firm, firms like Canva who do excellent work will do a lot of this stuff manually as a project. And really what we've done is just effectively move that into a product so that you can figure it out by pressing some buttons instead of starting a whole project you have to then analyze on the back end. So this is sort of helping to catalyze the shift of people doing more of it. Now you can actually, get the data that proves whether or not what you're saying is changing people's minds. But the basic idea is that, building the tech here, we're not the ones coming up with new marketing campaign strategies. We're not even the ones coming up with new strategies for, solving vaccination demand. But we sort of have more modest aspirations to kind of like be the folks in the back workshop that builds this little telescope and sort of hands it to Galileo. No one remembers the name of whoever built this thing, but Galileo figured out some pretty important stuff. And, you can make really large advances in what the scientists or the, strategists in this case can do if you can actually be that kind of workshop for the tech. So one of the key things that really stood out in getting this work going was that a lot of people thought they already had the answer. So a lot of people said, oh, we already measure the performance of campaigns. We go on the platforms and they tell us what that performance is. We look at, for example, how many people complete the views on Facebook of our videos. So, I kind of get your argument here. Sounds interesting, but look, my team already says we've got performance metrics, so we're good. And you never want to be selling the thing that's just a little bit better or sort of making the case for a practice that's only incrementally better. You have to really highlight that there's a real problem to solve here. And there really was a problem because folks in really large campaigns across the whole world really thought that this metric here, and you could replace view completions with click-throughs or, with just engagement rates of different kinds. They really thought that this was about changing minds. And so we went through and systematically with one of the really large FANG companies who is now one of our major customers. We went through and we took their whole, or at least a really large part of their whole marketing curve, all of the hundreds of ads that they made, and did systematic measurements, both of the performance on ad platforms, as well as RCT persuasion scores. In other words, actual experimental proof of whether that specific ad, each dot is one ad, lifted demand for the product or love for the brand, whatever the actual goal of the marketing campaign was. And when you plot it out, you'll look at this graph and say, well, there's no obvious pattern there. And that's sort of exactly the point, that if this was good enough, you should have had something close to a one-to-one relationship. More performance on this axis should give you more performance on the hard-to-measure axis. And then you say, well, let's find out proxy is good enough, we'll keep with it. But there's just no relationship there. So we did it again, we got that. And then we did it again, we got that. And then we did it a fourth time, we did it 12 different times. And then, because people are sort of wait a second, sometimes I used to get questions I don't know, I sort of see a bit of pattern here. I deliberately stuck in two, which are actually synthetic, just totally random data points, just to sort of show, because people often see patterns where there are no patterns. There's genuinely no patterns. You can quantify that as a correlation coefficient. So it really sort of, now there's a burning platform moment. There's we're spending $1 billion a year on this, and we thought we knew if it was working, and the guys cashing out checks to run the ads were telling us it was working. I guess I can understand why they would do that. But there's no evidence that it is. And so, we got some nice press on this, why I wrote it up. Last time I did this class, Raul said, well, hey, it's helpful to give an example. Why don't we show some examples? I vocalized one that, I can actually show it to you live, since I added a couple slides. But, let's make it real for folks. Let's take this dot here, right? Which is a dot that gets a lot of engagement, but gets no persuasion, right? It's the dangerous dot in this graph where campaigns think they're doing something good. The ad managers from Facebook are calling up, going, great job, you people, spending money on that spot. So here's an exact example. It's from actually non-profit, the National Park Service. So they have a conversion event that they're trying to do, which is get people, in this case, to go to national parks. It's kind of a cool ad campaign, it's for the environment to go to the park. There's over-consuming other things. So their ads, we can show them kind of contrasted urban scenes. In this case, there's a woman on a bus, and the person behind is talking loud on their phone, and this person sneezes, and she's just get me out of here. And then it just cuts to this beautiful park. And it says, on this particular weekend, national parks are free, come and check out the national parks. That's why this team of people and creatives and their agency and this department at the National Park Service, that's why they exist, to get that conversion event. So they had that ad. Everyone kind of liked that one. They had another one where it was just some boring thing people were doing at home, making their IKEA furniture, and just typical scene of what your weekend looks like when you're stuck in Manhattan wherever you are. Then contrast again. And then they had this third one, which was a guy in a public restroom, and it was kind of gross, and he tries to get the things working. There's no paper to dry his hands, and then the hand drying machine doesn't work. And they ran this on Facebook, and this was the dot with the highest engagement. This ad, they were getting phone calls from their Facebook ad manager off the charts. You guys have got to move all of the budget to this ad because it's performing. And when we ran the Swayable test, it showed that actually it's zero lift. So, okay, wow, this big $1 trillion company is saying this is the best ad you've ever made. This startup is saying don't trust that data. It's doing nothing at all. These are diametrically opposite conclusions. What's going on here? And so we really looked into it with them, and we found out pretty quickly that it was true that this ad was getting the most engagement. When you looked at what that engagement was, it was a whole bunch of really confused people who couldn't understand the point of this ad and actually thought that the restroom was at the park. And a lot of the comments were about, well, we're obviously not funding these parks well enough. We should, give them more money to make the restrooms better. Like, no lift in wanting to go to a park with creative like that. Yet you look at the performance metric on the ad platform, it says this. In a sense, logically, that should be obvious because, I could run this video spot and get high engagement too, right? There's obviously no link between people clicking and viewing and the brand metric. You have to refer to the brand to get high engagement metrics. And if you don't have the data, you're just as likely to be playing in this red zone of low persuasion as in the zone of doing well. So this is an actual real distribution. So the question is basically, hey, if your ad's not working, eventually you'll see no sales, right? So just see if you've got sales, and that's the way to optimize. Yeah, that's great, but the problem is that data comes quarters later, and the link back to that decision you made 3 or 6 months earlier is very difficult, very tenuous. So there's many other things that can explain the ups and downs that happen. So in practice, that link's never made. Now, you can make it if you set up an experiment and say, okay, we're going to control everything. We're going to randomly allocate households and run ads through addressable television only to some households and not to others. And then we're later going to find a quite expensive way to figure out which of those households later went and bought the muffins on the shelf or went to the park. You could do that. And you'll get a quote from probably $500,000 from a firm to do that study. So, yeah, it's a question of bounded rationality. In the abstract, it's more rational to do that, but it's actually not possible to get the information because there's a cost to getting information if you want to put it in that sort of economic perspective. So yeah, there's a really wide distribution, and of course, if you know what's good and what's not good, you have tremendous sort of optimization possibilities. And one thing that really stood out to us at the really early days of building Swayable was that we're not the only ones noticing this. Like the platforms themselves have noticed this and have just been unable to solve the problem for reasons we can get into. So this looks like a kind of a crazy, messy table that's buried on page 27 of this the article. But I strongly recommend folks get it. Take a picture or whatever, because this is an article published in collaboration between some folks from a business school and 2 data scientists from Facebook. But basically, the upshot is that they're saying, what we say is performing is not actually performing. They compare these tables are basically comparisons for a whole bunch of different campaigns and a bunch of different ways to look at the data that's given by the platforms around the performance of the campaigns. And the way to view this table is they've conveniently labeled or colored in red any experiments for which the platforms overstate the level of performance of the ads, and blue are the ones where they understate it. And you look at this table. This table is very red, right? Like it's basically mostly red overstate, and not by little amounts. Okay, here's a 19%. Here's 100%. Here's 1,000%. Here's a 2,000%. So this is the data that's being used as a proxy for budgets that represent, on average, 10% of the top line, the revenue of consumer brands. This is not a small bucket. This is like a major bucket of spend. So it's obviously not an equilibrium that can continue, which is kind of why we're doing what we're doing. Basically, we're kind of helping to catalyze this and replace a reliance on easy proxies that are bad, that are, in fact, shouldn't even be called proxies. I think there's got to be some minimum of fit for purpose before you can even use the word proxy with causal data that proves a causal relationship between the message or the treatment and the lift in demand that you're going for. So we like to say this is sort of like an escape from the streetlight fallacy, right, which the industry's been stuck in, where a certain amount of data is just easier to get, so people rely on it even though it's wrong. It's like this old joke where the drunk guy's lost his wallet and the police person says, "Is this where you lost it?" And he's like, "No, but the light's better here," right? It's sort of like, well, the data's better, it's just not the right data. Is that your business goal? Well, no, but it's more convenient. Well, arguably that's just not really an equilibrium that's sustainable in the industry. So that's why this shift is I think rapidly underway. And we're really happy to say that some of the companies like Meta who have previously been sharing some of these metrics are now also using Swayable to measure their own communication. So that sort of helps us establish the the case for this transition particularly well. And part of what we found is like, in the early days, the creatives that we worked with, including the agencies, had a lot of like weariness about data. And I think for good reason, because they've, come back, like, they do a campaign or they do some really interesting creative work. And then 2 months later, somebody from a metrics firm will come and go, yeah, that was just average. We've got the numbers, or that didn't work. And then they're sort of like, what do I do with that? Firstly, 2 months later. Secondly, I don't really understand it. Thirdly, the statistical significance is not that high anyway. So, 60% maybe you're right, but 40% maybe you're not. So by replacing that with an experience for them where like the next day they get the result, so they're still in the creative process, and it's like far more statistically powerful. So it's sort of like there really isn't any question about this message is really, there was 5,000 people in this experiment and, the lift was basically zero. You realize actually they do want to do good work. They do want to help the team win. Just have to help them get the data in a useful way. Yeah. Does that sort of answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to clarify about the parks. So you were able to see that the ad was getting a high engagement rate, but how were you able to measure people not going to the parks? Or
well that's a really important point. So we don't actually know if they're going to park or not, although we could do that experiment. It would just be more expensive. What we know is that they tell us that whether they intend to go to a park or not.
okay.
And so the leap of logic, which is frankly not that much of a leap, is to say that if you tell me and 1,000 other people, I definitely don't want to go to a park because they got dirty bathrooms and it looks really disgusting, and I take another 1,000 people and they say, cannot wait, I'm planning it for this weekend. Statistically, we all know which group is going to go to the park. Now, yeah, you could go follow up and go to the park and pay someone $100,000 to do that project, and you would learn what we all know you would learn. So effectively, we're just taking self-reported intent as the very strong predictor of action.
Yeah. And how do you get all this data within 24 hours?
Yeah, great question. So that's really one of the key innovations. So we're tapping into the mobile ecosystem. I kind of skipped over that, so I'm glad you brought it back. We have partnerships with apps in the app stores on like Google Play and iOS that let us effectively borrow their users. So whereas Nielsen has 20, 30, 40,000 people in a panel spend 100 years getting it, very expensive to maintain it, we don't have a panel at all. We call it a virtual panel. We just borrow the users of the apps and we exchange value with them, which is great for a number of reasons. One, we're not kind of creepily taking their data without them knowing. They absolutely know. We say, hello, maybe please have your data. We will give you this in return. Would you like to check out our privacy policy? And they're like, this is great. We don't ask any private personal information because we don't care. It's a mass communication campaign. What do I care for that purpose that you're living here in Boston? It's my ability to market to thousands of people like you that's relevant to the performance of the campaign. So we just get the demographics and the relevant segmentation information from self-reported information. We're able to cross-reference that so that we can check that stuff's right, in the aggregate. If there's any problems, we can detect those. And then they go through the experience of the experiment. And then the key kind of questions, which are the things you're trying to move, happen, of course, after the treatment. So that's the experiment that's delivered digitally instead of then kind of all the ways. Yeah, so we end up with something like 30 times more samples, which kind of blows. I mean, that's one of the main reasons people use this. They're kind of like, wait, did you say 1,000? I thought you said they've been running campaigns with sample sizes of a few hundred. I had this at the New York Times. I was at the New York Times, and we were taking big decisions about how to rebrand the International Edition. And we got slides that had, well, you should definitely call it the International New York Times, not the New York Times International Edition or whatever, because of this graph. And you look at the graph, and you're kind of like, the science person, it's sort of like, wait, there's no error bars on this graph. There's not even the end sample size. It's like, what's going on here? And you dig in a little bit, and you're like, oh my God, it's like 100 people. If you didn't have error bars, they would far exceed the actual difference they're reporting as a significant difference. It's like a real mess. So we realized that was a big opportunity to do a lot better,
So how are you quantifying like the bottom line effect versus if people go to the park and we're winning even though they're not spending more money?
Yeah, no, it's a great clarifying question. I'll give a metaphor, let me know if it's useful or not. We're definitely not saying that the sales are not the be-all and end-all. They are. I think what we're saying is that you can't maximize them if you focus all parts of your optimization only on sales because you don't have the data. And this is the metaphor that sort of occurs to me because I get this question a lot. Like, it's like you're trying to coach a soccer team and you're like, well, obviously to win the soccer team game, you have to just kick the goal, right? So here's my strategy. Kick the ball at the goal at all times, always. Why is that not the way people coach soccer teams? Because to get to the goal, you've got to have some strategy, right? The ball's got to go down the field. You've got to have the right combination. Everyone knows there's leading indicators of being able to kick that goal. That, like, winning is not just pointing at the goal and sort of moving your leg. So I think it's like that with sales and upper funnel. You cannot get the transaction unless there's a whole discussion about why this product is interesting and why I like it and do my friends like it and how do I feel about it. So if you're just kind of like, sort of, here, 20% off, go. You get some people, you can juice it a little bit, just like occasionally you can kick the ball if you point in that direction, but there's far more leading indicators you have to line up. And the obvious one is just demand. I want it, because the other way I tell this is to say, have you ever seen an ad for Nike or Apple that says, click here, buy now? Probably never, right? 100% of the ads almost, at least that I can recall, are that demand building stuff. Why? Well, because I know where to buy Nike shoes. I don't need an ad that says go click it. If I want a new Mac or something new came out, I know where to buy it. So actually, I don't need to do that direct response stuff almost at all. The game is all the kind of getting the ball into the right place to field. And then, you can kind of take the last couple of feet. Airbnb's great, actually. They were one of our earliest users. And they were running a campaign to try to get more people to sign up to be hosts. So that's a pretty big ask, right? Hey, let a bunch of strangers in your house. Unsurprisingly, the conversion approach doesn't work for that. You've got a lot of storytelling here. Trust, safety, Airbnb, payments, all of this, right? So how do you do that? Well, that's why great marketers and storytellers sort of have jobs. Ultimately, they were running campaigns in the cities where they wanted more hosts. In other words, where people were going to. They've got this two-sided marketplace. And so the question for them, of course, was like, what stories work? You've only really got a certain amount of space, and you've got to communicate a lot in there. In this case, the idea for the campaign was just, make the real hosts the star of the campaign, because I think authenticity and trust is important. Then they're not just kind of hiring actors. So they used Swayable to basically look at combinations of hosts and things that the hosts were saying. We've only shown a few of them because they don't fit on here. You can see one set of folks here that tried two messages for, but they tried all combinations. They had two different messages that were real quotes from the hosts for each host or pair of hosts, and then of course the hosts themselves. And what they learned was in different markets there was different folks that kind of successfully were able to drive up demand for hosting, depending on who they were and what they said. And importantly, it wasn't the same combinations in different areas. So there were folks who talked about kind of their sort of culture, history, and kind of had looks that worked in Los Angeles. These ones, for example, did really well in LA, where, I don't know, they think a lot about culture, and that's, big industry there, obviously, around Hollywood and film. And they had other sort of folks who, as sort of affectational sort of impression, kind of felt less like they were fashiony people, and were like, maybe they were relatable to the people in Nashville. I don't know, completely stereotyping here, but there was real evidence of this in the test. So there were campaigns and combinations that they ran in greater frequency in markets where they had direct evidence they were leading to more demand for hosting. And there were ones that they ran in other markets that had the greater impact there. So that was really cool for them because these are billboards, so you don't even get any click-through data on a billboard. And sure, you can wait till 2 months later and see if your numbers went up in that market or not, but that's not a way to manage a company. You have to take the best available evidence to take the decision, and there really was no other reliable evidence doing these experiments. So that was the Airbnb one. I'll show a few people interested in the Muffins one. I think is really interesting. Because it really kind of highlights why this is a big transition in the industry, right? These folks, everybody, spending, in this case, they were spending less than they probably should have on marketing, and they were working with Bain & Company, who walked in to help the folks who lead the company get more performance from the company. And they look around and they're like, well, we should market more. That helps. They benchmarked it and they saw, well, look, they were spending a lot less relative to industry peers and benchmarks. So now the board is asking questions and they're talking about, throwing around a lot of extra money, the order of magnitude of spend on these kinds of campaigns is about, as I said, 5 to 10%, typically at the higher end of all of the money they take in from all consumers. So they're like, okay, we want to do this properly. We need data, we need to set this up right. So these are these really great moments when you're doing new technology because like you don't have as much of a fight with the inertia. There's nothing there. So they're building this tech stack from scratch. And so Payne was like, yeah, well, you can spend all the money and let's make sure that you set it up in a way that as you develop the content, you're going to learn what works and you're going to develop the creative on the cycle that gets you a high-performing campaign than you would have under the really old approaches where CPG brands literally, people barely believe me when I told them this. I talked to ones, I won't name them because it's kind of a bit rude, but like they'll make all their creative at the beginning of the year for the whole year. So like 12 months earlier, you'll have the campaign for the 2 seasons away. Like anything could happen in that time. Global pandemic, the end of democracy, climate change, whatever, and they've the story that they're spending millions on was made a year ago in many cases. It's clearly inadequate for the work that they need to do. So these guys set up iterative agile testing. And in fact, a big part of what they had to do was win over younger consumers because they were not succeeding with them as much as they were with the older consumers who had already learned to love this brand. I don't know, we used to have this in the freezer when I was a grad student. So interestingly, they hired in consultants and agency people, and they thought, oh, hey, the way to reach the young people is emojis and edgy kind of messages, right? So let's try edgy, put some emojis, and then that's kind of a good way to do it. And they're like, we've got another idea, maybe just sort of optimism, because it is a traditional brand, so maybe we're not going too far with the emojis. So let's do optimism as well. And then the third one was maybe we'll stick with a pragmatic or traditional approach just to test it out, right? And the results were kind of almost the opposite of what many would have suspected. Yes, the consumers are Gen Zs and millennials that you need to reach, but the brand is a traditional English muffin brand. So, this edgy approach was not lifting demand for the product. In fact, you get about a 2x greater lift in demand with this traditional, no emojis, sort of speaking like an English muffin brand than the kind of alternative approaches that they were trying, right? So it's not what you would expect. It's not what would come out of qualitative research. How are these consumers speaking to each other? Let's write it down. How do they even talk about the brand to each other? Let's write that down. That approach would not have led you to the right answer. And the critical thing is people sort of see numbers and okay, yeah, better and worse. It's sort of an obvious point, but the number 6 is twice as big as the number 3, right? So now you're spending $100 million. And the whole point of that is to generate lift. This is a thing you are buying for that money. And that answer gives you twice as much of it as that answer, right? So it's sort of you have to kind of really emphasize how important such a large difference is because it's such a big bucket to spend. So the cool thing about this one, sort of to your question, I forgot the name of the back, sorry, is because Bain & Company was in the middle of it, local Boston firm, global Boston firm, obviously, they were doing some fantastic work, as I said, to restructure the marketing department. And they actually did the really difficult experimental in-market test that, probably 100 times I wish I could have been able to do, but nobody would pay for it. But nobody will ever run the bad ad in any market. That's the problem. And if you don't run the bad ad, you can't prove the counterfactual. It's the value of the optimization is how much better have you done compared to what you would have otherwise done. And nobody does the bad thing. So, but these guys did it, which is great. And they proved in this case, and I have to refer to their conclusion, it's not our work because they did it independently, a 7% lift in the sales directly caused by that optimization. And so, I've got details on how they did it, but sort of on purpose was done separately from us. And they don't get any revenue from us or anything like that. So, this is really good piece of work they did. So it's helpful for us. So, another example I think it most important for you guys on vaccination, because this is not about selling anything. This is sort of about, trying to stop lots of people dying. And I got a call from McKinsey. I used to work at McKinsey for a few years, and they came to us and said, "Oh, hey, we heard that you guys can measure how much campaigns are lifting opinions or intent to do things. Would it work for COVID vaccination? In this case, in Australia, where I grew up, so I knew the partners in the firm there. And we were like, absolutely, like show us the messages and set up a call tomorrow and we'll have the results. And they're like, what? So we did this and they gave us the current messaging that was being used in Australia, which was like, at the time they had this government there that liked to sort of, the message was like, arm yourself against COVID. They kept repeating this phrase that they picked up in some focus groups called, that was arm yourself. Like this, the ad had the phrase arm yourself in it like at least twice, maybe 3 times, like arm yourself against COVID by Jet. So we put that message in. And then we also, the McKinsey group, rewrote versions of the COVID vaccination ad campaigns that had been run in other Swayable clients. So the Oregon Department of Health, for example, we also worked with California, and we almost were working with the UK government. They had another one, which is about self-protection, and it talked about the severity of the disease. And they had a different theory of mind. Like their theory, if you want to call it that, was like, people have been misinformed that the disease is not serious. And so our ads are going to take that misconception and address it, instead of, like whatever was in the minds of the people in this focus group that tough people, need to get vaccines too or something. I don't know. And so we ran them both, and the results were just like mind-blowing, because like they were spending tens of millions of dollars on this campaign that was designed to save lives of people. And we ran this experiment with like 3,000-4,000 people in a day, and the best amount of learnings from it is that it had zero effective lift on vaccination intent, right? So all that work and money is wasted. Plus, like, it's not even the work and money, it's like the people that aren't getting vaccinated. People forget that it's not just kind of wasted money. Like, the point of the work is to deliver some important, valuable outcome that the value is far greater than the value of the work itself or the cost of the work. Versus the Oregon's Department of Health, Oregon's Department of Health messaging had a significant lift of like 5 or 6 percentage points once you got into the segments that they were really targeting that were not getting vaccinated at a high enough rate. So the second I saw this, I was getting calls from the chief of staff to the Minister of Health while he was in the car on the way to Canberra to brief the minister, because, it's quite serious stuff to get wrong, So I don't know, kind of part of why we sort of vandalized the need to do this, because the work is actually very important, whether it's about the growth of companies that are selling something or it's about important public health initiatives. And actually, this is from a related kind of public interest advocacy deployment. This was actually about getting people to vote. So what we're looking at here, and you'd be surprised, like this is sort of the next horizon that it's going to have to be done repeatedly, that is currently being done by only a minority, the big cowardly using the data, right? Which is like, you make a bunch of messages and you get the scores. And then the obvious thing to do is just run the good stuff. So up here is good for week 1, and down actually going to a backlash is bad. So okay, we all know what to do with that. Run these ads, don't run those ads, right? Okay, sure. But the much more powerful thing to do, which is like cumulatively more value, is to say, go back to the creatives and the messaging strategy people and the marketers, then say, hey, this kind of stuff is not working. That's working really well. Can you do more stuff that's kind of like that and avoid this kind of stuff? Oh yeah, okay, cool. So week 2, they got a batch of 10 different messages, because they were doing them every week, not once a year, like the old kind of approach. And the top message now is like twice as effective as the top message in week 1. They got almost no backlashing stuff. They got a few things that, on borderline. And then week 3 is like more of the really good stuff. And by week 5, like they're able to consistently turn out stuff. And these are wholly independent experiments. These are not the same people coming back that are well persuaded. These are different people in a controlled experiment environment. And this is no mistaking the learning curve effect of having access to data and the feedback that makes the function of these marketing campaigns just like a lot more effective. It's like just a little bit more effective. So again, something else I think is just sort of too rational to not happen. It's sort of a question of when. And of course, AI is going to make this a lot easier as well, because like the main objection to doing this is like, oh, what, they had to make 10 messages in week 1 and another 10 in week 2? Well, it takes us months to do things. And, that's why I was in the early days when Upworthy was the thing. I was bullying like Upworthy people, like, see this person makes like 10 messages a day, on Upworthy, because, they're like dragging them to make all the URLs of BuzzFeed. Unfortunately, it's true, those people around these days. So that's what the user experience looks like for folks using the platform. We've really consciously modeled it on Apple's design patterns. And we actually got the chat. In fact, last time I was here, I was pitching Apple right when I was here, and we got some great feedback from them, which was really good for the team because, they're hard to impress. But the basic user experience approach on data, I think it's been really important. It's to say basically you've got two user types and you're having to solve for both of them at the same time. Just like Apple's computers, you'll see hackers doing stuff in code and, data science on them, and you'll see sort of like, other people that are not as technically focused on them, and the same product serves both, right? So they've done something really cool with the UI here. Like it works for sort of high-level decision-maker, non-technical people, and it works for people who want a lot of detail. And so we kind of tried to take that approach where if you're a marketing decision-maker, so let's say you're the head of marketing at Paramount Pictures and you're releasing, your new film, Top Gun Maverick, right? Which is a true story. They're a customer and this is what they do. You go into the big marketing meeting, you put the Swayable results on the wall, and you're taking decisions because 10 points with this segment is good, and 3 points is bad. And you even know, these guys have been telling us about this thing called a confidence interval, and if that error bar is wide, that means it's a little bit less certain at the beginning. So you kind of started to edge in a little bit to some of the more data science questions, but ultimately it's really clear, and you're not seeing tables of random stuff and, that you can't interpret without the analyst there. And if you're the analyst, you can click in here and there's a whole sidebar that comes up with a lot more statistical information, and you can kind of poke around and look at it. So here's what it looks like for this is the one that we were just showing. That was the national parks. You can kind of click in here and get a whole bunch of information about the control group mean and the test group mean and all that kind of stuff. So you hide the more complicated information under the hood, but you get access to it. So the data scientist feels like you're not hiding the ball. So they've got full transparency. They can download more data, but you're not like obfuscating the important message for the decision maker. That's the thing that kind of UX approach. Yeah.
Actually, all the time we have for today, but thanks everybody for questions.